All right. Hopefully this is recording. Now, I downloaded a recording app a while ago, and I've tried to start this podcast a few times, mind you. This is, I think, my fourth time now. So let's hope it works. Perhaps this message isn't supposed to get out, or there's forces trying to make it not get out, rather. Not surprising. All right, where should I start? Because I've started this 4 times. The topic is stemming from a previous podcast I did regarding life before addiction. Okay, we're still doing good. Life before addiction. And in that podcast, I was discussing some of the themes and things that occurred in my life that I feel like were the catalyst to me using later on as an adult. All right, it's still going good. And in that, some of the themes and influences. And like I was saying before, I will never say that such and such made me use drugs or made me do anything. I am simply relating to the influences and the themes that were occurring in my life that I feel like sort of prompted me and pushed me in the direction of seeking something outside of myself to fill in a void, to, dissociate, to comfort me, yada, yada, et cetera, et cetera. And so in that, recently for me, I have been having a lot of dreams regarding church in my early life in the church. And I believe this is a theme for a purpose, and perhaps it was leading up to this. I believe I stated in the previous podcast, I grew up in the South. It was Pentecostal in a sense, related to Pentecostal. Most of the churches I went to identified as non-denominational, which I took to mean like they don't really have a specific sect. So it wasn't Presbyterian or Baptist or Protestant or Lutheran. It was just sort of its own thing. And in that, the Bible was preached very literal, very word for word. There's no variance. And, I think I went to a few different churches during my childhood, but all of them were speaking very literal from the Bible. Like the word is the word and there's no variance. That's not up for interpretation. Whoever was interpreting it, that was the gospel. And I was saying in my previous podcast that I don't have a memory of, as children, and part of the beauty of being a child is that you take things at face value and you're not really questioning it. That's part of the beauty of it. And then the opposite side of that, the negative polarity of taking things at face value, is that you're not questioning it and that you're sort of at the mercy of whoever is delivering the message. And as a child, at least in my case, I was, just taking things spoon-fed. I revered my parents as God in a sense. Like they could tell me no lies. Why would they lie? It wasn't even on my radar that it was a possibility that they would. I think that's a good thing in a sense, because I know a lot of children grow up with sort of like not trusting their authority figures. And that did occur for me later on for different reasons. But for a time, I pretty much put, the truth in my parents' hands. Like they're telling me the truth. I didn't even think to question it right away. Now, when I was in the previous podcast, I'm trying to remember everything I covered before I realized it wasn't recording 3 times before. So, my early times in the church. Now, what I was saying is that, I remember early on going to church, and I don't remember really what some of those early on feelings were. I'm thinking, of course, from infancy, but up until 5th grade even, I don't remember a lot of what I thought about church, how I intellectualized it. I don't really recall. I could tell you, as an adult, young adult, teenager, what I thought of church and those sort of things. But there's a period of time in my early life, because I started going to church from birth, I don't have a memory of the thoughts I had regarding it. I do have a clear recollection of the feeling. It kind of goes hand in hand with that saying, people might forget what you say, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. Feelings are they're just ingrained in our memory in a different way. And I am connected to memories based off of feelings very intensely. And so fear was the predominant feeling in my childhood in regards to church. The book of Revelation, I believe, was a rated R movie. And I, still to this day, depending on how the Bible is interpreted, I feel like it should have a parental guidance warning on it, because it is traumatic. A lot of parents don't want their kids to read, quote, smut. And, when I was growing up, I wasn't allowed to read Goosebumps Wasn't allowed to watch The Simpsons, various shows like that, The Smurfs, because it was demonic and all these other things, but then we'll send our kids to church, and the pastor or whoever will be discussing hell and damnation and demons and all these things, and we don't even think, like, is this going to be traumatic? Well, I'm here to tell you it was traumatic for me, and I'm sure it was traumatic for a lot of other people. But I'm digressing. Anyway, so I don't have a lot of early on intellectual thoughts of what I thought church was, but I do relate to the feeling, which was fear. And I was trying to sort of like remember how things shifted for me. Now, early on, I was afraid of church. Before I felt I even had anything to be afraid of. I just knew I didn't want to go to hell, and I was going to do, as long as I just, accepted God into my heart and, lived according to whatever the Bible and the pastor was telling me, I'd never have to worry about going to hell. Hooray, problem solved, right? That became a little bit more problematic as I got older, and, desire and these other things started to come in that I didn't previously have as a child. But, so, like I said, from birth until about 5th grade or so, I don't really recall the thoughts I had regarding Christianity and all those things. I just remember the feeling, which was a lot of fear and reverence. It was like a holy respect for it. It was like, okay, if I just do what I'm told, all right, then I don't really have to worry about it. Close case. And then there's a period of time where I don't really have a lot of memories or recollections of feelings or anything as far as what I thought, about church. Things pop up here and there, but it's not really a stream of connected thought. The next time I do have a stream of connected thought, I remember being probably about 12 or 13. And I remember in the church we had been, in the church I went to, one of the churches in my early youth, we had gone to Pensacola, Florida. And there's a church, I don't know if it's still there, but I think it was called Brownsville Assembly of God. It's a huge mega church. Now, if you grew up in the church and going to church as a child, you're familiar with mega churches and revivals and things of the sort. And so that was part of my life. And so the entire youth group and some adults, we all trekked down to Pensacola, Florida for this 4 or 5 day revival type thing. And so I have memories of this. It was an awkward kid. I was prepubescent. Fuck being prepubescent. I pretty much had, titties and hair on my legs and under my arms already. Although I was not allowed to shave until much later in life, which is ridiculous. I don't know why parents did that. Specifically mothers. Anyway, but I was fully developed and I was very aware of myself, and I was, I had some baby weight. This was before I got into sports. I was a little chunky. This is before I had braces, or it might have been at the same time I got my braces. I don't know. I was very self-conscious. I did not like how I looked at all. I didn't really connect with anybody else in my youth group either. Most of the kids were a little bit older than me. I was already shy and kind of introverted. I say all this to say that when we went on the trip, it was just kind of like, all right, let's get this over with. I really don't want to be a part of this, but, at least I got to go to Florida. I get to go to the beach. Cool. So for most of that trip, I can remember feeling a disconnect from the experience entirely. I can remember feeling just like, all right, everything going on around me seems great. I could see these kids, and this church was huge. It was like, a coliseum, like when you go to see concerts. It was massive, from what I recall. And, I remember looking around at all these kids and these people, losing their minds, falling out, crying, hands raised. And the music was quite wonderful. I do recall that. I remember the music. It was more modern. It wasn't the generations before us where it was more sort of hymnal music, like the old hymns and shit like that. No, church was starting to modernize in my generation. And so we had some quote hip songs, things were starting to jazz up a bit, so I could get into the music, and it was kind of nice. And I really liked the music at this specific church. But for most of the trip, I was sort of disconnected from the experience. I wasn't really looking down on anybody, but I was sort of confused what all the mass hysteria was surrounding me and why everyone seemed to feel all these things that I wasn't feeling. And I'm like, what is wrong with me that I am entirely removed from this experience? I don't know what's going on. People are talking about the Holy Ghost and, God coming down and all these things. And I'm like, no, I'm just hungry. I don't, when are we going home? And so, like I said, I remember for most of that trip, I was very disconnected from the experience. Now, at some point during this trip, I do remember connecting. I don't know what happened. I don't know any of the circumstances leading up to what occurred. But I just do remember it hit me. It being this sensation of immense love. And I believe that to be God. I really experienced God at that moment. I know that now. Although I would have denied that for a period of time. I would have said I drank the Kool-Aid and whatever else. It was the power of suggestion, yada yada. But no, I know now that I was really feeling God. I was. I didn't, all these kids were sort of saying these things and sort of like, quote, prophesying, and like they had all this like very ingenious spiritual revelations and things like that. And I really wasn't on that wavelength. I was just connected to this immense feeling of love. I remember that very vividly, just feeling happy. I felt fucking happy as shit. It's like, that might have been the first time I really connected to true happiness. And that was overwhelming, not in a negative sense. That was very positive. And I would just cry and cry. So now I'm a part of this. Now I'm looking around and people are crying and with their hands raised. And now I'm like, okay, I get it. This is what they're connecting to, because this is a wonderful feeling. It feels like, I remember as a kid, I equated it to jumping out of an airplane, although I've never jumped out of an airplane. I want to. But sort of that exhilarating feeling of just overwhelming thrill. It was like, I cannot contain all of this. This is so much that I don't know if I can contain it. There's so much going on that I feel like I have to give it away to others. I have to talk about it. I have to do whatever I can to spread this, to share this, all those things. And I remember there was a pastor or a youth leader or somebody at the time, they used to go around and sort of prophesy to kids and things like that. And I remember one of them was speaking to me at one point, and he said that I was meant to help lost souls. Now, I remember at that time not really knowing fully what that meant. I just knew I was excited, because if you grew up in the church, you might be able to relate to whenever there was a pastor or somebody who was prophesying, you kind of always hoped you'd get called on. You kind of always hoped that they'd look over at you and point and be like, come up to the front. And there'd be like a prophecy, a revelation, something from God to help you. I always wanted that. And it never hardly happened to me. And so when this guy was speaking to me finally for the first time in my life and saying that I was meant to help lost souls, I really took it seriously. I was like, okay. Honestly, I do recall having the thought of, well, that's kind of generic. Like, aren't we all meant to help lost souls? Like, I feel bad thinking that, but it was just like, of all the things that one could get, quote, as a gift, I'm just here to help lost souls. Like, okay, whatever. But no, I connected and identified with that prophecy. I hadn't really connected yet to the feeling of loving people. I was very self-conscious, very introverted, and I realized now this was a process I had to go through. But now I love people, and I see why I'm more connected to that prophecy now as an adult than I ever was as a child, because I would have told you I hated people, and I was introverted and antisocial and all those things when I was a younger kid. But during this time that we had gone to this revival in Pensacola, Florida, I was really connecting to this idea of helping lost souls. I remember when we got back, the youth group got back and we're in church, and everybody, was of course sharing their experiences, and all the adults are talking about, like the kids have been changed. They're pumped with the love of God and the fire to spread God's word. If you grew up in the South, you're familiar with all the rhetoric. So all these things were being said, and I was jazzed. I was pumped about it. Like I said, I wasn't really on the wavelength of saying a lot of, I wasn't quoting scriptures. I wasn't, I didn't have a lot of definitive messages to give people. I just knew I was happy. I felt this amazing amount of love for myself and for others that I had never experienced before. And I wanted to help others feel that. However I could do that, I wanted to help others feel it. And so that was a transition in my life. It went from fear to a period of time when I was thrilled. Like I said, the churches I was in were still preaching the Bible very literally, and there was many things that they would say and preach that I didn't quite resonate with. And I realize now as an adult, there was many things that my intuition that was, very ingrained within me. I wasn't aware of it. I didn't even know what intuition was at a certain age, but it was active and it was working for me. And I was already beginning to sift through the material and the things that were being delivered to me, and sort of digesting and filtering out what really fit with my soul and what didn't. And so a lot of the words and the terminology, those things didn't really stick with me, but the feelings did. And the feeling I always resonated with was love. It's just like acceptance for all. It doesn't matter what race you are, what nationality, what demographic, how rich or poor you are, if you're gay or if you're straight, if you're young, if you're old, if you have a disability, if you don't, no matter what, God loves you, criminal or no criminal. And that can be hard to fathom, but regardless, you are loved by God, and it's an amazing feeling, and everybody deserves to feel this. And that was something I really connected to as a child. Now, like I said, this was pre-puberty, and this was before, many of the things happened that I feel like pushed me away or helped, sort of made me feel second guess my direction I was going in. Because by the time I hit puberty and I was a teenager, I remember, when the feelings of, quote, homosexuality started to develop within me, it was very problematic, because I remember feeling within myself, like if you would have asked me, is this right or wrong? I would have said it was right, that it was love. It was a display of love, and it was perfectly fine, between two consenting adults. How is love a negative thing? I didn't understand it. And, people have used the Bible to dispute homosexuality, but they're using a version of the Bible and scriptures in the Bible without knowing the origin of what was really being spoken of. Now, we know the familiar script, and I don't know it verbatim, so I'm paraphrasing, but if you're familiar with the Bible, and especially with the BS that a lot of people have tried to use against the LGBTQ community, there's that whole reference to, I think, Sodom and Gomorrah, and how, it was homosexuals, and they were just in God, thou shalt not lay with a man as thou would with a woman, or some shit like that. I'm paraphrasing terribly, but we're all familiar with that sort of story, and I might be combining two stories, I don't know. But then there's the reference. I realized when I was older, and I did my own research, and I'm watching podcasts and reading articles, that what the Bible was actually referring to specifically at that time was essentially a group of men, pedophiles, who were having sex with younger kids, little boys, and that's what the Bible was speaking against, and that the actual word homosexual actually wasn't initially in the Bible or something like that. It was actually added to the Bible, something along those lines. Like I said, do your own research. It's out there. I'm not looking at anything right now, and so I'm kind of just going off of my memory of what specifically I'm trying to refer to, but the research is out there. And so once I realized that, I was like, wow, well, the church has just kind of fashioned what they wanted this scripture and what they wanted this story to mean against homosexuality, and that doesn't seem right. And so it really kind of lost its clout. And so, but I was still at this sort of internal struggle, because, like I said, when you're a kid, you want to believe your parents. You don't really have an immediate, for most of us, well, let me not say most, for a lot of kids growing up, there wasn't an immediate reason to doubt our authority figures. Like I said, I know that there was a lot of people that had traumatic experiences as a child that made them question their entire foundation, and I completely empathize with that. I'm just saying, there are people who can identify with the fact that a lot of us just trusted our parents at face value. We didn't even fathom that they could, first of all, that they could possibly lie to us. I never thought that. And then, but even unintentionally, the unintentional part of it didn't even come into play for me. I didn't even know that existed. That they could be telling me something that they didn't even have the facts for, and then that they're telling me it in a way that is displaying it as truth and concrete and unwavering. And I'm taking it as face value. I'm believing it, and how dangerous that was. And how this is how, things are shaped and formed, and how we get our values and our belief systems. And so in my intuition at that time, it was really telling me that this wasn't right. This wasn't right. I should be able to love who I want to love. I should. I really identified with that. And so I remember, where am I going to go with this? I have so many thoughts kind of going through my mind right now. So as I got older, and I had previously connected to this feeling of love and happiness and these wonderful feelings surrounding God. And then I start to hit puberty, and I start to have feelings for girls. And now it's in contrast to what I'm now being told is that God, hates me, dislikes my sin, that I'm sinning and that I'm going to hell for it. That it's an abomination, it's unclean, all these things. And that didn't work for me. I was like, I can't make these feelings go away, for one. I can't. And I have immense empathy for anyone who has been down that road, who might even currently be in that journey of trying to pray the gay away. It's a natural feeling. Embrace it. It's okay. It's only unnatural because it's coming up against, values and belief systems that we've been previously taught should take precedence over our own intuition and our own inner compass. And I always tell people to follow your inner compass, because as humans, I do not believe that we were born with sin. No, I believe that we have a perfect creator, a sinless creator, and he did not create sin. He created free will. And in free will, and us having the freedom to make our choices, that's where we sort of, quote, create negativity, what you might identify with as sin. But just that free will is when right and wrong come into play in that sense, if you can follow what I'm saying. But we weren't created inherently sinful. So much of the Bible, how I was taught, let me make sure to say that, how I was taught referenced us as we're just born in sinners and we were not worthy of God, and it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And I say this from a firsthand experience. I highly recommend anybody who is maybe questioning this, if you have family and loved ones, of course, use your own discretion. Don't force anyone, because free will is a thing. Everybody's on their specific journey for their specific reason. However, if you feel inclined to do so, go on YouTube. There's a podcast called Next Level Soul Podcast, and it specifically centers on NDEs, which are near-death experiences, and out-of-body experiences and things like that. And I have been someone who has had near-death experiences and out-of-body experiences for a good long while now, consistently. And in that, there's so many stories within these experiences that you'll listen to, and they're all aligning. Everybody's saying the same thing. The amount of love you feel when you're on the other side, how God is none of the shit matters. We are down here judging us. He's not judging us. We come down here to learn these things and to have these experiences and to evolve, but we are the ones, humanity is the one that created the judgment and we're not good enough and this and that. But in the eyes of God, we're perfect. And, all of these stories are saying the same thing. Not to mention, I've had my own experiences. I have astral projected. I've had this ability for a while now, and it's been evolving and this and that. But there is an amazing amount of freedom that is felt when you're on the other side. Now, these things, as I was taught, weren't in the Bible. I'm not sure if they are or aren't. But when I was growing up, I wasn't taught these things. I wasn't taught astral projection and the astral realm and these things. And so as an adult discovering this, I was thrilled. It was like a confirmation for me that because I am a member of the LGBTQ community, first of all, it'd taken me a while, but I had lost the narrative of that being gay is sinful. I had let go of that. Now, society has begun to come around, not to say there's not prejudice and those things, but society has come around quite a bit. And it's unfortunate that there's still prejudice in this and that, but, everybody's on their journey for their reason. And so I just think it's really beautiful that, first of all, we have to remember the Bible was mostly, I don't know what percentage, but mostly written by man. And man is, infallible? It's either fallible or infallible, which means we are capable of mistakes. We're capable of having flaws. And we interpret things that we're all familiar with the game of telephone that we used to play when we were kids, and how one message, by the time it gets through all these people, can be entirely distorted and something else entirely than what it originally was. This is how most of the Bible was presented. It's man's interpretation. And in that, there are flaws and there are things that don't align with actually what God speaks of. That's why God specifically says at one point that out of all of these, the most is love, is just to love. I'm paraphrasing. But that is what I was identifying with as a child. And that is what I feel like is the main compass that we should lead by, is love. Is love. If you're practicing love, it's hard to go wrong in that arena. Now, depending on how you view love to be and how you experienced love as a child and therefore now believe love to be as an adult, that's where, indifferences can come about. But I'm just saying, like, love in its purest form is how we should all lead. And if we're leading out of love, it's really hard to go wrong. And love means, it's supposed to be unconditional and accepting and, as God intended it. Meaning, like, no matter what, like, you are still loved. You still have value. You still have worth. No, you're not going to go to hell because of who you choose to love. Like, it's ridiculous to me. But it's just beautiful now that I've been an adult and had that experience and many experiences to connect with the other side and realize that, like, it really is just based on love, and that so much, I'd say more than half of what we worry about as humans, and if I don't have this job and if I don't have this and that, like, I'm not worthy, I'm not up to standard, blah blah blah, I don't have kids, I'm not married. Once you're over on the other side, all of that is nullified. It doesn't matter. Can you all chill out? My animals are acting crazy. Once you're on the other side, none of that matters. Like, you're perfect in the eyes of God. So yeah, I highly suggest you check out that podcast on YouTube. It's really amazing and beautiful to hear so many stories, essentially saying the main principles of it are they resonate all the same, and just that love, and that how that's what matters, and, like, who you sleep with is the least of anybody's concerns, and how it should be the least of anyone's concerns, and how we're just worried about so many things that we don't need or have to be worried about. And I realized when I started this podcast was supposed to sort of lead into the things that sort of caused me to use as an adult, but I believe that a lot of my experiences, especially in relation to the Christian church and how it was taught to me, are what led me down the road to using. And I believe that this specific podcast, it just kind of further dove into some of the things that I was speaking about before, and just how I perceive God now and how I perceived God then, and how it's sort of transitioned and it's had many different flavors and all those things all throughout the years. But how, and essentially I've come to an understanding that yes, God is real. Yes, there's multiple planes of existence, but there is an entire reality right beyond, but it's really overlapping, sitting on top of the one that we're even aware of. Like, it's amazing. The astral realm is real. Astral projection is real. These are things that were not taught to me, but I suggest, just looking up some information on it if you're curious about it. But, yeah, specifically how I related to Christianity, God in general, is a lot of the catalyst in what led me in the direction towards using drugs, because I was sort of seeking that feeling of contentment and happiness and that feeling of love and feeling whole within myself in drugs and alcohol that I didn't feel for most of my life due to a lot of the influences that were surrounding me. And when you're as a child, you're not really responsible in a sense, I don't think. Like, you're at the mercy of your caregivers. You're at the mercy of your teachers, your parents, your authority figures. They are the ones telling you what to do. You have very limited choice. And so there's just a lot that you just end up believing. And God help you if you don't believe it and you were like me and you wanted to buck back a little bit and go against the grain. It makes it a lot harder. But it's also, I believe, it's really beautiful to follow those parts of yourself that feel naturally led to things, because I believe that we should follow our internal compass. That's what it's there for. Intuition is a beautiful thing. And, I think we over-rationalize it. Like, intuition is going to be like this grand gesture, a burning bush, although I'm sure we would all prefer that. I know I personally would. Give me a burning bush. Give me, a dove with a message in its mouth. I don't know. Like, give me something clear and concise. But intuition is really a beautiful gift. And it's those inner nudges and the subtle things that, we might think of. It's usually the first thought we have in mind, right? But it's, the little things that it's like, I had a feeling. I thought maybe. It's those things. And the more we use it, the more it's developed and the stronger it becomes. And then the stronger it becomes, you start to realize and recognize it as something that's been there all along. It might have just been quieter, or you might have mistaken it as, something else, but it's been there all along. And that was essentially my experience in realizing that as a child, like, I believe part of what got me through that period of time without entirely losing my mind and trying to kill myself, which I attempted at times, but what really part of the main thing that kept me here is knowing that I felt this internal sense of this is right, that I'm okay, that everything, all these things that people are telling me around me, I'm sinful, I'm an abomination, this, that, and the next. That's not how it is. It's not how God sees me. And I realize these people are telling me this is how God sees me, but this does not feel, and it wasn't just a one-day thing where I felt this. No, this was every day of my life. I was thinking, this is not right, and it only got stronger. And so, yeah, I'm going to leave it there today. I feel like there's definitely going to be more with this. I'm just going to call this part 2 to it. But just essentially, I believe that a lot of what led me to use was my experience with faith as a child and growing up over the years, and how my faith strengthened and waned and all those things. And it was an influence in causing me to seek out certain things as an adult, but ultimately how faith was what got me sober again, which was a really beautiful thing for it to come full circle. But yeah, I'm going to leave you with that today. I hope everyone is doing amazing. Treating yourselves with compassion and grace. The energies are wild out there in these streets. There's a lot going on, in the nation, everywhere around us, a lot of things that could, influence us to lose our peace of mind. I highly suggest unplugging from it. It's not going to suffer if you unplug from it. I personally choose not to watch the news. You can think what you do about that, but it works for me, and it's already hard enough to maintain your peace of mind without watching the news. So I can only imagine for people who are really plugged into all the things that go on in the world, not to say we shouldn't be aware of it, but to the extent that a lot of us are, I don't think it's necessary. So just be mindful of what you're absorbing. Thoughts do become reality. I believe that's quite literal. We create our reality with our thoughts. And so if you're in a mindset of peace and tranquility and, maintaining a positive, trying to resonate with your highest self, essentially, that's what your reality will reflect. And don't worry about the how, because everything around me and everybody else might still be, don't worry about any of those outside influences. The universe is quite magical, and there's many things we don't understand. So I say, don't worry about the how, just trust. And I promise you, there's another episode I planned on making, I might still do, but I have my reasons for really believing in the universe. This has been a wild year for me, and I've been through a lot, and I have come out the other side. I feel like I've been rebirthed a million times, but one thing that has sustained is my faith in God, and that faith and trust and believing that, things are going to work out, and really clinging to that. It's magical, and it works. So yeah, hope everybody's doing good. Stay safe out there in these cosmic streets, and namaste.